Welcome to another episode of Coming Up Next, the podcast where I sit down with the world's top creatives and speak to them about fashioning a life of their own design. That's right, I said fashioning, because I didn't want to say creating twice. Big thank you to my guest last week, Monty Lux. She came on the show and gave a very transparent talk about what life has been like working in the adult entertainment industry for her. If you haven't listened to it, I would highly recommend checking it out. You can do so at comingupnext.com.au. You'll also find the previous 146 episodes and links to subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, and Podbean. That's at comingupnext.com.au. Bryce Jacobs is my guest this week. Bryce is a film composer from Sydney who currently resides in Los Angeles. Bryce has got an incredible body of work to date, having worked with people like Hans Zimmer for remote control productions, as well as on films such as Rush and the 12 Monkeys TV series. He's worked across film, across TV. He's worked on video game scores. He's recorded at Abbey Road, and he's even designed his own guitar. But you don't need me to tell you all about it because I'm about to ask him all about it. So let's get over to the interview, episode 148 of Coming Up Next, the podcast with Bryce Jacobs. You've been living in LA for about 10 years now.
Yeah, 10 years in August.
Wow.
That's when I got the job that brought me here, so yeah.
That's pretty incredible. What was the process like for you to move over from Australia?
Pretty rough. Because I came here, I'd been here a couple of times before, but in 2008, I came for 3 months just to see what I could muster up. And I'd talk to and, meet up with anyone who would meet up with me, and I, after about a month, landed an internship at Remote Control. I was ready to take any way in, so that was the thing that I found. And then, believe it or not, on the 89th day of a 90-day visa waiver, 5 hours before getting on the plane, I got the job with Ramin Javadi. And so basically it was a difference between leaving stuff in this country or taking it all home. So I left some stuff here. I went home and packed up life and wife over the period of about 2 months. I was very quick to pack up, your whole existence in a country, pack that all up, sell it off, figure it out, and then get back over here, working out the right visa at the same time. So it was all a bit of a trial by fire.
Yeah, it sounds pretty hectic. And Remote Control, that's Hans Zimmer's company, isn't it?
That's right.
What was it like for you, I guess, to kind of, to be working in a company with this master kind of, within, I guess, almost 3 months of being in the States?
Well, I was there for 5 years, and I often tell people that I've done 2 degrees in music, and I liken this to a 3rd degree because there is just so much stuff that you learn, and a place like that, so much stuff you learn on the job, and a place like that is really so rich in content because it beyond the incredible musical creature Hans is, you've got about 25 or 30 years or something of people that have come through there, and they've all refined the process. So, which is very liberating when you can just get on with the creative side. And working for Ramin initially as his tech, I had very patchy knowledge of computers and also engineering and that kind of stuff. I had to tighten up very quickly. And by the time I became his additional writer and then went on to be independent, it was quite incredible because all of a sudden all these ideas that I've had for years couldn't really do anything or communicate them to anyone properly. I could do myself. So it was quite a liberating experience. I really think, and not just that side of things. It's actually the business side. You can be a fly on the wall with some of the biggest meetings that go on, and before you actually are in that position yourself. So it's quite an education.
Yeah, I often have the conversation with filmmakers about the kind of the purpose of going to film school versus kind of going out and getting a real world education. And it sounds like you've sort of done both. It's almost like, I guess, like you say, like this is that. It's almost like uni's an apprenticeship, and then going to do something like that's like a master's.
Yeah, totally. Because the thing is too. I mean, I did did a lot of guitar teaching back in the day, and some college tutoring, and the thing is, like, as I said to my students once, it's like you're in a bit of a safety bubble when you're at college or university, because you've got teachers that will chase you up. Like, what have you done? Why haven't you done it? And can I help? And when you get out in the real world, it's not so much like that. It's quite the opposite. If you're not cutting it, you just don't get called anymore. So you really got to have it together. You got to, it's hard enough in this business if you do have it all together and everything's firing in the way it should, let alone if you don't. So,
yeah.
So that's kind of the thing. And then beyond that, you've got to have a point of difference, because especially now, I mean, 10 years ago, the market in terms of the composer world was nowhere near as flooded as it is now. And 10 years before that, I mean, it's been quite a shift in the tide. And I think there's very real reasons for that. So you've really got to hone your craft to a point of difference, and something that you have the versatility to offer to people, but you've also got like a character about you. You're kind of like an artist, viewed as an artist nowadays.
So I guess on the subject of honing your craft to a point of difference, when you did finish uni, engineered a guitar that could reach 7 different octaves and kind of mimic what a piano could do in terms of versatility.
Yeah, it's it was a design that I first had the idea in my bachelor degree, and I thought, it was just kind of a bit of a theory, but I had nowhere near the facility to actually pull something like that off. And even when I did, I worked very closely with Gerard Gillet, who was great, brutal, honest guy. I mean, anyone who you want to give money and they're like, look, we should really figure this out before you give me money. I mean, you've got trust there already. And when I went up to him with this idea, he's like, nope, no, it's not going to work. I'm like, okay. So I kept on running ideas by him, and it's to the point where, and just in my naivety, what about this? What about that? And then he's like, well, actually, and then I kind of sparked a little bit of interest out of him, and then he got excited about it. But then he also said, look, I'm into this, I'll do this, but if it doesn't fly, it's not my fault, okay? And I'm like, all right. But then it all came together, and, because I'd listened to so much orchestral music in particular in my undergraduate, and it was just, it was kind of like feeding this massive hunger I had. But all of my favorite composers like Wagner and Debussy, I mean, they never really touched a guitar, or, Beethoven or anyone. I mean, it just didn't have that orchestral sound. So that's, and part of it's the limited range and the tone that wouldn't carry. So, I designed that thing basically for this, and it's very, and I proved the point with, transcribing pieces like Moonlight Sonata or Clair de Lune. But then, I'd spent 5 years practicing repertoire, and I just wanted to, take this into my own world. And it's been an incredible textural instrument. It's also been like a point of difference where people are like, whoa, what's that all about? So
I was going to say, was it kind of a conscious point of difference, or was it just like you just kind of in a tactile or kind of visceral way just wanted that sort of instrument?
Well, I'm extremely critical when it comes to innovation in music. Like, are you doing that or are you not? And I'm critical of I'm the most critical of myself. So, I'm a great believer of like people that have, that kind of, what would you say? They're
It's not innovation for innovation's sake. Is that what you're kind of?
Yeah. I mean, like on the other side, like there's, say, like fantastic blues guitarists or jazz musicians that are keeping the history and the freshness of that alive. And that's one thing, even if it's not an innovative approach. It's like a curator type thing, I think they say, you know. But if you're outside of that and you're just resting on the shoulders of other people, I think, well, what are you offering? What's your slant on this, you know? And even, you know, there's like for a while there's been a real throwback to the 80s, and some people just totally just fall on that, and then other people have an interesting edge to it. They put their own thing on it. So, you know, for me, it's always been about that, and the guitar is just one aspect. But, you know, even as a kid learning guitar solos, I very quickly wanted to depart from them and try and figure out, you know, like what were the component parts. There's always that degree of like inspiration out of nowhere that you can never quite capture, but that is where your personality lies, you know, your musical personality. And I think it's something you should nurture. Yeah. And, you know, I'll be doing that to the end of my days.
I think that's kind of a great ethos, not just for music, but for creativity in general.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, you mentioned a couple of great composers. Did you grow up with classical music in the house?
Yeah, I grew up with a bit of everything. I mean, I often laugh because the first album I ever remember was my mum bought Thriller. So that was my kind of musical start, which was incredible. But at the same time, I was listening to the Never Ending Story soundtrack and Star Wars, and I just thought every kid listened to soundtracks. Not so much. But, you know, I had a lot of classical music around. I mean, it might sound dumb, but I really respect the old Warner Brothers cartoons, you know, Bugs Bunny, etc., because it's filled with classical music, Mozart, Wagner, etc. And kids are getting exposed to it, and they're not even realizing it, you know. So not that was my only conduit to classical music, but there was jazz around, you know, obviously rock and pop, and I just had such a love of everything. But I guess initially, you know, my initial stream was pop, kind of film scores and rock, you know, somewhere in that domain.
Yeah. You grew up in Sydney?
Yes, I did.
Do you remember, like, the first time that you picked up an instrument, or the first time that you kind of played or performed music?
There's a couple of funny things about that. I was given, like, one of those toy guitars when I was 3 where you press a button and it does it all for you. And I was so shy about it. Like, thank you. And then I went in the garage, locked myself in there and played it. I wouldn't even play it in front of my mum and my grandparents. Ironically, my studio is a converted garage, so the arc is there, coming full circle. But the first time, I mean, my mum bought me a guitar when I was 11, and it was I still got that actually. And I sometimes record it was like a 3/4 size Toledo acoustic, and it was an incredible year for guitar. Actually, it was 91, and like these albums that were coming out, like Blood Sugar Sex Magic by the Chili Peppers, Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 by Guns N' Roses, Pearl Jam 10. Nevermind by Nirvana, Metallica Black. I mean, it was a crazy year for
that's
albums.
That's a rock and roll year.
Yeah, and changing the guard, like the 80s was kind of, you know, starting to dissipate, and the 90s was really kicking in, especially with the grunge. And then the dance era, which then I applied all the guitar stuff to. I just, you know, filter sweeps on wah pedals. But the first time I ever played anything in front of anyone, it was actually Stairway to Heaven, because it's there's a surprise. But I had a next door neighbor, and I was listening to one Sunday afternoon when I was 12. I'd heard Twist and Shout on the radio, and I'm like, oh, you know, I'd really love a copy of that. And I went next door and I said, "You've got some Beatles, haven't you?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "You could Twist and Shout, blah blah." Yeah. And he said, "Do you want me to put some other stuff on there as well?" And I'm like, "Sure." And he said, "You know the Doors?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "You know Led Zeppelin?" And I'm like, "I've heard of him." Not realizing it was a band. He said, "Oh, look, when you start playing Led Zeppelin, I'll validate your guitar playing." So the next morning, I'm putting this tape on, and I hear Black Dog, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, I know that." And then I hear Stairway, and I'm just transfixed. And it was like 8 minutes song, and I had to be on the way to school in like 4 or 5, and I didn't hear the rest of the song that day, like that morning. And I'm like, what's going to happen next, you know? And I'm riding my bike to school, and I'm making off the rest. Maybe it'll do this, maybe it'll do that. So that started like a 6-month, you know, quest to learn that song and go from playing like little nursery rhyme melodies and the riff to beat it on to actually trying to be a real guitarist. And it was like, as I was playing this, little chinks of light of like, that sounds like the recording for a moment. So then, you know, Trial by Fire, the first time I ever played in front of anyone, it's like Stairway to Heaven, guitar solo and all, for the little music academy I was learning at in the, they hired out a preschool hall. and I played it, and it went really well, and it was just electrifying. And for better or worse, till death do we part, I was in.
Yeah, wow, that's quite a
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
That kind of, I guess, exploration or journey of kind of discovery as a musician or as a filmmaker or actor or painter, you know, it's quite it's like that moment of, you know, to kind of sound, or to use a trope, there's kind of that transcending moment where you feel like something coming alive, you know.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and it's an evolution too, because I think that, you know, I'm someone who kind of really wants to evolve, and you know, I got, as I said before, like I really quickly wanted to be able to improvise my own guitar solos, and then that led to like wanting to songwrite and a fascination with lyrics, which then led to composing and all these things. It's not like, you know, and then that finished and then that finished. It's just, it spread out, you know. And even Stairway, it's like I saw the word arpeggio and I'm like, what's that? And then, you know, I thought, well, I should study music theory, or there's a classical side of that. There's a like guitar wise, there's also a in that song. And there's also like a folky jazz harmony, you know, thing that's happening as well. And those things really sprouted me off to, you know, really go down those paths more wholeheartedly. And it's, you know, it's just, I don't know. It's like a kid in a candy shop, really. Keep on discovering other stuff. And there's a sugar high.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
and then the inevitable creative crash.
I was just going to say creative and, you know, business and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's a very hard combination. So.
Oh yeah, being a creative entrepreneur or an artistic entrepreneur, which I guess is the kind of 21st century crisis in a way.
Yeah, if that's the worst crisis, then we're okay.
That's true.
It is a weird existence. I heard a musician say once that every day you have to basically validate your own existence as a musician, and it's true. And the more kind of, I guess, up the ladder you want to go, and the more esoteric or, you know, out there you want to go, it's the harder to make a living out of it. And I think it's great, once again, when you're at university and you're in the bubble of not having to make money from it, you just explore. It's really exciting. And even like, you know, one of my favorite bands, or probably my favorite band I've ever been in, was a band called Arkenstone when I was 18. And these poor guys, these other three guys, like I'd go and learn all this stuff at uni, and then I'm like cramming all this stuff in the phone booth. Like, the four of us can pull off this thing, you know? And it was like, a lot of it was, you know, it's like a Thelonious Monk thing. It's like when it worked, it really worked, and when it didn't, crashed and burned, you know? But I think that once you get out into the real world, that the trick is, how do you do what's creatively fulfilling, but still make some coin on it? And now I think it's harder than ever before. And it's also, ironically, more important than ever before that you do have that point of difference to stand out. Because like I said before, it's just flooded. Music's flooded, and, you know, music composition's flooded. And it's different. Like with what I grew up with and the romanticism of what I was watching and listening to, it doesn't really exist anymore. I mean, for instance, like you know, growing up in the early 90s, and, you know, this kind of punk thing that turned into grunge, and then, you know, before anyone else kind of really got on the bandwagon, I discovered Led Zeppelin, and I was listening to them and Pink Floyd and these bands that would go on stage with this reckless abandon, and their albums were just, you know, an evolution of what they were all about. And you know, it's kind of like photographs over the years. Whereas very quickly, late 90s, early 2000s, it's like your first album's your best of, and then the second album's Kiss of Death. So you don't actually see how a band evolves to these great moments, you know. Zeppelin were 4 albums in when Stairway was there, and they had a lot of great stuff before. And I think one of the most interesting kind of anecdotes on that is with Pink Floyd. There's an album of theirs called Metal, which I love, and metal as in meddling, you know. And it's an album where it's really a turning point for them. There's a song called Echoes, which takes up a whole side, and you can hear the sound shift. And basically the record company had said, look, you guys need to do your own thing, kind of rediscover some territory, discover new territory, and, you know, here's your budget, blah, blah. So the album did all right, but the next album was Dark Side of the Moon. So it's like Metal is such an important album because it gave them the launch pad to be able to do this album that was, Dark Side, that just is still one of the highest selling albums of all time. But the record company kind of got back, they backed them on that experimental album. That doesn't really happen now, and musicians, like, you've got to get your money from other sources because, the recording industry isn't really the financial thing it used to be. So when you've got to get it from insurance agencies or, advertising or whatever, then you kind of become a product that you've got to be very careful not to go outside of. So the more money you want to make, the more confined you get, which is very different to what it used to be. So it changes the culture. It becomes like more than just the music. It's like the artistic shift.
I think with the way that, certainly in speaking to other musicians, streaming services like Spotify and Apple Music have kind of nullified the idea of the album as it kind of existed 20 plus years ago. And I'm sure, I guess it was kind of happening before with iTunes and things like that, where you can just buy songs. But, like you're saying, it's kind of now more prevalent than ever.
Well, what's funny, though, is the resurgence in vinyl. And the demographic for that is like late teens and early 20s.
Yeah, right.
And I think, my age group or generation, whatever you want to call it, like, we're probably the last ones that remember vinyl in the house, and I had an obsession with it as well at the time. But, it was like, then, there were tapes and CDs and all that kind of stuff. So what's interesting is that there's these kids that, like, have never really had that, but they crave it and they buy it. And it's a tangible thing, which I think is really fascinating because, don't get me wrong, I love the convenience of downloading a song on iTunes or streaming or whatever. But I remember if I was obsessed with a song as a kid, then I'd have to save up my money. I'd then hope the record store had it or order it in or tell them to put it on hold. I'd go there so excited and buy it, and then I'd listen to it. And I may have only bought it for one or two songs or it was a band that, I loved. But you're invested in the album. You're like, I paid for this. I saved up for it. I'm going to listen to the rest of this. And then your mind gets open, from that stuff.
Yeah.
But it was also like that. It's not like that now. It's very quickly self-gratifying and you just get what you want and you're done. You can scan through tracks, etc. And so I think it's a really interesting statement, and it gives me a lot of hope that, this resurgence in vinyl, like, people interested in the artwork, they want to listen to the whole thing. It's an experience, that they swap it, they listen to it with friends. I mean, this is like a throwback to what it used to be. So there's a bit of hope there.
Yeah. Well, you kind of take the experience out of the music by not having the album anymore. And I guess one of the kind of benefits of the streaming stuff is the algorithms that put in place, which means that you can discover new music or new artists. But at the same time, it's kind of like cheap thrills in a way, I guess. Like it's like you say, it's just short bursts of what you already know, as opposed to kind of expanding your
totally
mind.
It's highly prescribed and manicured, and I think what I actually miss is throwing a radio station on and hearing new stuff, that is kind of like, isn't this interesting, or isn't this cool, or this song or whatever. It's not, the internet is got everything you'd ever want, but it's a lot of white noise, and I don't think they've quite got to the point where they can concentrate that to like a internet radio kind of thing, because satellite radio or whatever iTunes offer as playlists and stuff, I don't want to go there and go, I want to listen to the Pink Floyd station or the Pearl Jam station or the Björk station, because I'm already making a decision about it that I'd rather just hear some stuff that's new and interesting. What Triple J used to be like in Australia when I was growing up. It was all about that. And they actually broke the band Garbage. Like, that happened from Triple J. And before they were getting played on commercial radio, it's like, oh, this band's so cool. So I think that's really important for someone somehow to get right. And I think the playlists are starting to kind of reveal that. People become DJs of, like mixtapes basically. And that's probably, maybe that's a bit of the future, you know, because then you're investing in someone's taste as opposed to like, they're controlling the situation as opposed to you saying, "Oh, I want to listen to whatever, Michael Jackson."
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Going to your musical comfort food.
Yeah, you can't exactly go, "Oh, I want to hear this band I've never heard before that I'm not too sure exactly what I want them to do," or So, I mean, a lot of the new music I get exposed to is through music supervisors because they were used to be like a part of the filmmaking crew, and then as the recording industry went more and more south, I mean, getting syncs was everything, and so now they get flooded with music. And usually, when I'm working on a project, I'll be working closely with the music supervisor, and I'll hear all this music they've been sent. I'm like, "Oh, this is super cool," So that's my kind of radio station.
Yeah. Well, going back to you, I guess, skipping back just a little bit. Before you were a composer, you were a sessional musician with people like Josh Pike and Sophie B. Hawkins. What was the kind of thinking, I guess you kind of touched on it before, but when you started composing work, I guess around 2006, and started working with people like David Hirschfelder, what was the kind of thinking there?
Well, it was interesting because I was exposed to a lot of music, as I said, and I played a lot of music. I played in a jazz big band at high school. It was the first time I got to get overseas, etc. And Kirrawee High School, I should say. I was. It's very, very fond place in my heart. But when I got to doing the session stuff, I mean, I was always playing in bands. I was doing a lot of teaching. Then teaching started to absorb too much, so I started to kind of. And I realized because, at 23, I was making good money from teaching, but I was miserable. So I started to kind of move more away from that and into getting in the session world while I was, continuing to cultivate my own voice as a songwriter and singer-songwriter and composer, etc. So what I realized quickly into that is that, some people get what they want and they're like, "Oh, it's amazing." Some people don't get what they want. They always wonder like, "Oh, I wonder if." And that kind of experience, me, Josh, and the band, we would hang around some of the biggest artists in the world. And I was just looking at the situation. That's what I really realized what I fell in love with didn't really exist anymore. Not at the level that it used to. And so I started to look at film more because it really seemed to be the last bastion of somewhere you could actually go on these creative tangents, like crazy creative tangents, and a lot of that is due to Hans and how he approaches things. And that's why I was attracted to that place as well. But yeah, just I did enjoy the session musician thing for a while, and don't get me wrong, like we played all over Australia and all the TV stations and the TV radio stations, and then we went to England 3 times and we played the BBC, we played Glastonbury. I mean, we had a good run of it, and but I probably spent the last year like fighting myself, like I almost hated myself because look what I get to do, and I'm really unhappy, So that's when I decided to make a shift and just like, what, I'm going to the States for 3 months, and what will be, and if I come back and I become a carpenter and the music becomes something special it used to be when I was 12 years old, then so be it, But then stuff started to kindle here, and even over the last 10 years, it's interesting because just as something seems to totally go to crap, something else rears its head, and you're like, oh, okay. And I often say, like, at my lowest points over here, it's not like when I was in bands. Been more intense over here, but the irony is when I was in bands and it was just feeling like we're going nowhere, I'm like, what am I doing? And like, what am I doing with my life? And also when you're in a band, you're basically relying on 2, 3, 4 other people to share the same level of ambition and not implode. And it's almost like you've got to make it before you implode, because most bands do. the most successful do. I think U2 is the only band that's been super successful. The same four guys, and they don't hate each other. So yeah, I guess that's all these things. Like they just kind of they funnel down to what is your personality. And I really think what I do now is me. I think it's it's me as an artist in what I do, and I thoroughly enjoy it for the most part.
Yeah. Do you find a difference between, because I know that you've played on some big film scores aside from composing, things like Pirates of the Caribbean and 50 Shades and Rango. Is there a difference between being a sessional musician, say for Josh Pike, and playing in the score for Pirates of the Caribbean?
Well, first and foremost, the commute's better, going all around the world. Yeah, I mean, you're a studio musician. You're a studio musician for these things. And what I found that was good is, as a musician, it's kind of good currency to get into, be taken seriously as a composer. And it's also like composing in terms of income is just like a, how long is a piece of string type thing. Whereas you have to kind of get paid well. Well, that's the idea as a musician, especially if it's union. So that can help offset some of the composing decisions you make, and you can get more interested in more interesting things. But I think, even with Hans, when I played on Rango, it kind of, I wasn't just the Aussie assistant of Ramin anymore. So it kind of had a bit of a domino effect, and then came Pirates and Puss in Boots. Puss in Boots was a big one, and it's a very Hollywood story in a positive sense, because I studied all types of guitar, but my first degree was primarily classical guitar. And, it was for the love of it. It was for the technique. It was for the liberation of it as a guitarist, and be able to pull off anything that I wanted to do. But I wasn't going to pursue a concert career or anything like that. But here, this thing comes along that with Rango, they needed a classical guitarist. They needed a classical guitarist to play tremolo. I needed all of Hans's famous friends to not be available, and then enough people to say to him, "Why don't you try Bryce? Why don't you try Bryce?" To the point where he tried Bryce, and it really worked. So then the other composers kind of see that, and that Puss in Boots, like that is something. Well, all of that, but especially Puss in Boots, it's something that if I spent my whole career as a classical guitarist, I don't think I would have ever gotten to do something like that, So, and that's on the side of what I'm really doing. That's what's remarkable about this place and actually being here.
I think it's the old cliche of finding yourself in a lucky situation, but it's really that intersection of where you're prepared for an opportunity.
Yeah, well, that's right. A producer friend of mine who's been a mentor for like 15 years, and I'm now working with. He's legit. He's like Oscar legit, and he said to me, he's always had great bits of advice. Like, and I'd always get excited about the first half and have the second half in my head. So, like, when I first came over here, he's like, you spend that amount of time there, and doors will open, but you got to be ready to walk through. And I'm like, doors will open, But it's true. Like, if there's an opportunity there, and it's usually, it's not like, okay, you've proven yourself here, blah blah. It's usually a broken rung in a ladder, and you're like, okay, what do you need? And that's usually the way to, get further up. And every time I've had a bit of a leap up, it's because of that. And, you're there, they look at you, and it's like, how would you go with this? And then you've got to make, not good on it, but really good. And, and over here, not to kind of gild the lily with Hollywood, it's extremes. It's a brutal town, but it's also a town that you can go out and pound the pavement, and it's amazing what comes up. But it can be very much like a bubble. Every billboard's TV or movie or video game or whatever. You kind of feel like you're constantly at work to a certain extent. Now, because I work out of my home and I'm with my family, which I love, it's gone from traveling the world to, I've gone 2 or 3 weeks and not left the house. and to a certain extent, I'm fine with that. I've become a bit of a hermit. But, now and then I like to, de-gollum myself and get out there and, or there's meetings, etc. that you go to. But a lot of the time in today's modern world, there's a lot of Skype going on and FaceTime and Dropbox and, and important emails. So the art of the meeting is now become the art of the email, if that makes sense.
But is there anything more satisfying than a really well-crafted email?
Before or after send, yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing. Like, if you get that right, then you can get cues approved easier. But it's hard. You haven't, not to have. I work with people I've never met. I did a National Lampoon documentary, official one for Sundance. And, I was up there with my wife and I was talking to the filmmakers, and my wife said, "How much time have you spent with them?" And I said, "About as much time as you have. I've just met them." Because they were from New York and I was working in LA, and we're doing it via Skype. But and we only had 3 weeks to do it, which was, 50 or 60 minutes worth of music, which was quite the onslaught. And it was low budget, so I had to do everything. But
that's crazy.
I guess, some of the most satisfying things, just, talking about the email, like some of the things that are just arrive easily, you're like, wow, and you feel like, it's truly a blessing. You're like, I can't be responsible for this, surely. And then, the things that are the most trying and the most challenging, some of those, or a lot of those on the other side of it, I'm like, that can be my favorite moments of something I've done. And everything in between is it's the extremes that kind of give you the most satisfaction.
Yeah. So I guess, what was it like to, be creating so much music in such a short period of time? And I guess, because that was only in the last sort of couple of years. So I guess there's the culmination of, 8 years of working with remote control and some of these sort of titans of the industry. Did you feel kind of well equipped to be able to do this sort of job at that time?
I did. I mean, I'm glad I didn't go into remote like at 19 or 20. I think that, even though I had some definite ideas back then, but I really felt like going into my mid-20s, it was mid to late 20s, it was a different kind of thing, because it just opened the floodgates for me to kind of get all these ideas out and try them and bring them to life. So, which was wonderful. And it's funny how things kind of, I guess a financial weakness initially kind of became like something that is a bit of a, point of difference for me. So like when I started doing this stuff and everything was on a laptop, trying to record, etc., I didn't have synthesizers or the money for synthesizers. So I just had my guitars around. So I just extrapolated every single last tone out of them that I could, just to basically lie to your ears of what you think you're hearing. Supporting the orchestra, trying to make them sound like synths, etc. And then that's kind of what I guess people that I work with get excited about, even though I've got synths now and all this other stuff. It's it's funny how that takes a complete turn. I think that's the same situation for a lot of people in their own context. But even like a couple of years ago, I bought a pedal steel guitar, and I, out of respect, learning the Hank Williams stuff, etc. But then it was funny, as a guitarist, I was super frustrated because I just wanted to play it. But as a composer, I was really excited because I didn't have any muscle memory and I would just discover things. And then, there's, in recent times, people are like, "What's that synth? It sounds pretty cool." And I'm like, it's a pedal steel guitar. So, yeah, it's funny how these things kind of turn around. And then leaving remote, it's very much about, for me, leaving remote is more of the pendulum swings are bigger, but I've always wanted to, getting back to my own voice thing, I just always wanted to kind of build it for my career and cultivating that, and, so I can have my own name and place. So that was a big decision for going it alone. But yeah, I think that doing that, then your sensibilities get to broaden and head down different paths.
Do you feel like, chipping away and just kind of putting one foot in front of the other, having made the decision to move to Los Angeles, has kind of served you in opening the doors that you otherwise wouldn't be able to open to, or walking through those doors that are open for you, and finding yourself in a place where you're really satisfied, sort of 10 years into the LA leg of your career?
I think in terms of what I'm not coming here, I think 100% in coming here. But it's not without its, as I said before, like, I think and this is an American story more than anything. I mean, it's, much broader. But if you come from a country that's not America and you're doing, you've got ambitious stuff going on, if it doesn't work out, you've still got, pretty good safety nets. But you can only go so far with your ambitious side unless you, for the most part, if you come here, it's a different culture. It's a very positive and you can do anything culture. But you can go as far as you can take it. But you can also fall to absolutely, homelessness on the street very quickly. It is that kind of place. So it's remarkable to me that anyone can make money from music nowadays. And the fact that I feel like I'm in the top 10% of the planet, So,
Yeah.
I mean, I remember like a World Vision guy coming to our high school back in the day. And he just started with, living in Australia, you're in the top 10% of the wealthiest people in the world. And it's just, that's a real eye-opener. Like, even if you've, absolutely rock bottom in Australia, you're still better off than being that in India or another country that it's a lot more populated and a lot harsher, at that same level. I think you got to count your blessings if you can have the perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I've had my hard times over here, very hard times, but as you say, one foot in front of the other.
Yeah. Is that how you kind of pull yourself through when you are going through a rough patch?
Yeah, and it's not all me. It's I've got a great wife that is very good with supporting her crazy husband, and it's just, I mean, for me, family is so important, and my little daughter, and she can totally dissolve any, get me out of my head pretty quickly. So that's a really, I mean, everyone's got their own thing, but that's really, especially working from home, because a lot of this job is hurry up and wait. I've traveled like 50 minutes to do a 5-minute fix and then 50 minutes back thanks to LA traffic. But now I've literally been playing with my daughter in the pool. I get a fix note and I run in here in a beach towel and go send and then run back in the pool.
That's incredible.
So it's a much better existence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
How do you define the success of your work, and has that evolved over time?
I mean, I'm super ambitious, so I want to, till my dying day, take it as far as I can. But I think that, and obviously that's awards, etc., and everything. I think if you try and make a beeline for an award, it's horse before the cart type stuff. I think that you just got to do the best work you can do, and if the stars align, you're on the right film or on the right album, those things can happen clearly. But I think that for me, it's been extremely gratifying to hear my music on all these different things. And I was watching the 2012 Olympics, and there's this girl doing a gym routine to Puss in Boots. And then I just caught myself. I'm like, that's my guitar going through that stadium. And there's moments where you got to sit back and go, this is quite incredible. Especially with Rush and working on Medal of Honor as well. Top Gear use a lot of stuff from that. And I also work with a great company called Audio Network, which they kind of give me, they're the kind of guys that are like, what do you want to do? And give me a lot of creative license, and then we discuss it from there and kind of A&R it. And then that's very enriching and gratifying to be able to have that. There's a funny story with that. The first album I did with them a few years back, there was a piece of music from a film that had kind of gone nowhere, and I had it left over. And it became, and I think it still is, the theme song for Long Lost Family in Australia. So here's this film that went nowhere, this, a few pieces of music that I still kind of had on a hard drive. And, Aussie guy in America works with a British company and gets a pretty good gig on an Australian TV show,
Yeah.
From a film that went bust. It's, and that's a better situation, because if it went with the film, it just would have died. But this got a pretty cool life of its own. So, but I'm, you ask anyone from any aspect of my life, I've been stupidly ambitious, but it changes. At 19, you're ambitious for the sake of it. Like, I want to take on the world type thing. But, 10 years later, when I had a wife and, it was real risks and sacrifices going on and ahead of me, it's different. It feels different. It's like I really need to make this work. And it's almost like you become more ambitious because there's more at stake. So,
yeah.
Then throw a kid into that, exponential.
Yep. Is there a difference, I guess, just quickly, in the approach between, say, doing something like Medal of Honor, which is a video game, and doing something like Prison Break or 12 Monkeys or one of these sort of series or films?
Prison Break, I'd only just come on to work with Ramin, so I was just kind of assistant stuff as he was finishing off that series. But Medal of Honor was interesting because video games are interesting because it's like you give them all this music and it's like they need an intro and an outro and this loopable thing in the middle, so the player can go on for ages. And at the time, they just got the technology that if you finished a level, the music would round off and you would go to the next one as opposed to like chop. So you are kind of writing a lot of music, obviously not to picture. You get given like game grabs, what do they call it? Can't even remember the name, but basically they play the game and they video it and send it to you, so you get a bit of a vibe. But then you kind of go on just your own tangent and work it from there. Working on a TV show, 12 Monkeys, or anything like that. A lot of today in TV they really want a cinematic score, so, and that is to picture, and it's I think it's finding the right tone for the show, whatever you're working on. That's what's exciting about when you do a pilot or you start off a series, because you are creating this sound that you see this image that starts to come through that becomes that thing for that show. And I think that's very satisfying once you've got that musical personality for that particular show or film.
Yeah, and it starts to take its own sort of life and its own tangent and course.
Because it's a collaborative effort, and you've got a director there, and it's great because it's like one of those things, like with given a limitation comes great creativity, because you're not just like, anything's an option. And even with Rush, Hans said to me, like, go and do something, but only with guitars. So, I went all orchestral with 37 guitars and then we kind of, that combined with Hans's theme and what I had, thematic wise and sonically and all that kind of stuff, that kind of became the sound of Rush, and it really, that was a wonderful experience in itself. But it's, he wanted the guitars to kind of be the creative juice that got injected to the orchestral stuff and the electronica. But it's curveballs like that he'll throw at you, and you're like, oh, okay, I haven't thought of like doing a guitar symphonic thing since I was 15. And when he did it, then it was like, well, actually, this could be really interesting now, because you're not just listening to Metallica anymore.
Yeah. What was it like working with Ron Howard? That must have been a trip.
That was remarkable. I mean, that guy has been famous all his life, and he's such a sweet human being. And I just got a phone call from Hans' assistant to come in his room, and because he wanted me to watch a movie. And I walk in, and there's Ron Howard. I'm like, whoa, And so I sit up the back and watch this movie. And Ron comes up at the end, and he shakes my hand. He says, "Oh, sorry, I didn't get your name." And I'm like the least person in the room. I hadn't done anything musical on it yet. And I kind of smirked and went, "Bryce," because he's got a daughter named Bryce, and he's like, "Oh, yeah. Kind of not going to forget my name." But it was wonderful. Like this piece of music that I wrote, Hans just played for him and said, "This is something Bryce did," and he got really attached to it, and it kept on. He kept on referencing it throughout the process, and it was extraordinary, to be able to do that. And it was very humbling, I mean, I was able to, like, Hans and Ron are like, they've been working together and close friends for decades. And, to be able to come into that situation is quite remarkable, as an experience and a personal and a professional experience. So, and the film was outstanding. So I just, it was special. It was very special.
Yeah, what a great thing to have been a part of.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Bryce, for chatting with me and sharing your journey I finish all of my podcasts with the same question, and that question is, what makes you silly?
What makes you silly?
Yeah.
Probably the DNA of my grandfather. I think he was silly as a rabbit, and he's always like making me laugh. And I just find that I'm the same with my wife and my daughter. And it's funny you say silly because my daughter says, I got a silly daddy. And I say, well, you got a silly daddy, don't you? You know, I just do dumb stuff to make her laugh, anything I can think of, you know. So, and she's got a great sense of humor too, and so does my wife. So, yeah, I think I just think my natural way. I mean, look, even like in my work, in a comedic situation, I just did an animation where this character is like, his lines are pretty operatic because he's like this, everything's dramatic to him. And then I wrote music around his delivery, so it becomes like his own opera, and it was just making me laugh, you know. I'm even like doing like little choir bits behind him, and it, you know, I couldn't actually get through some of the vocals. I ended up getting through them, but I keep on cracking up, like, this is ridiculous, you know. So, yes, I'm silly professionally and personally.
Yeah. And do you find that having that kind of, I guess, irreverent edge, you know, not taking things too seriously in a kind of person-to-person way has served you well?
Yeah, no, totally. It's funny because I've always hated the idea of, you know, selling myself or networking, like not networking networking in the sense of just being there for a reason. And that's why it's great to have an agent that covers a lot of that. But, you know, the switch kind of went in my mind with, well, actually, I'm really interested in people. So whenever I go to any of these things, I just get in conversations with people. Of course, the musical stuff or whatever they do will come up. But, you know, for instance, like I was at a friend's birthday. We all went away a few months ago, and he works in previs, and he had one of his colleagues from London come out, and we kind of really hit it off. And then I went over to London recently and was recording at Abbey Road, and he came to that. And then he had a project that he's like, actually, do you want to come in and talk to everyone and see if you want to work on this project? And I'm like, sure. So it's kind of, it's good because you meet someone with no agenda, and if it works out, then great. You know, it's better than going in cold and everyone knows why they're there. You know?
Yeah.
So,
wow, you recorded at Abbey Road?
Yeah, it's the second time I've done it. It's
wow, what was that like?
Oh, it's, you know, the first time it was like, you know, for the first, I arrived, we got rid of all the technical stuff out of the way, and we had about 15 or 20 minutes before starting, and the engineer said, anything else? And I said, yes, for the next 15 to 20 minutes, treat me like a 15-year-old kid and show me everything, right? And my sister came the first time, which is wonderful, but then my mum came the second time, which and this was only recently, this was in January. We went all around the UK, and I'd been there, like, this was my 8th time there, so I knew where to go and visit family. She'd never been there before. She hadn't met all this family. And then we ended up at Abbey Road, and it was very poignant because there were a couple of pieces that were related to my family. One in particular is about my grandmother, and Mum was there for that in the room listening to it. And then we realised it was 2 years ago to the day of her death that we were recording it.
Oh, wow.
So this is pretty incredible stuff because there's recording music and there's writing music, and then there's a situation like that. And that's a personal thing as much as a professional thing. I mean, you know, the personal side, it's like that's going to stay with me for the rest of my life and will always be magical. So
absolutely.
So that's, you know, and when you're at Abbey Road and you've got a mum who's into the Beatles, you know, it's also got that as well.
Well, if you go to Abbey Road for a third time, I'm going to come with you.
You're more than invited, my friend.
Hey, before I let you go, do you have any memories of your grandfather being silly?
Oh, he had these dances he'd do. You know, he's this American war hero, you know, Purple Heart, Silver Star, Bronze Star, and, you know, he's saved guys in the South Pacific, and then he's just there doing the most stupid dance to get me laughing. But, you know, he loved his family, and he just, you know, especially after all those experiences.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I mean, I actually heard a tape of him once saying that he had a friend over here that was blind, so he'd send him these tapes, these audio tapes from the, you know, his letters, and he was talking about how, you know, my grandfather was trying to watch the, like, whatever fight it was, you know, boxing, and I just, you know, cracking up because I I thought he was asleep. That's what my grandmother told me. And then I saw him in there, and I just launched at him. This poor guy, like, you know, in his late 60s, and you know, and thankfully he thought that was funny. This little 3-year-old projectile, you know, coming at him. But he was a wonderful human being. So, and we had a lot of fun. He would dress up, you know, he'd be on his hands and knees playing whatever I was into, Transformers, He-Man, Voltron, and, you know, he'd just get right into it, you know, fire hats on and all that kind of stuff.
Encourage the silly.
Oh yeah. He helped program it, or you know, you know. So it's and it's nice because I relived that with on the other side, being with my daughter. So
yeah,
it was lovely.
Generations of silliness. Thank you so much, Bryce.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you.